Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this 100th episode of the Stand-Up Speakeasy with Sreth Nave, which is who is me. And I'm pretty excited because I love interviewing comics from coast to coast, and that's up and coming. And we talk about their comedy journey so far. So, with that being said, coming all the way from Alabama is Compton Smith. Hey, Compton, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Sureth?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm so honored for you to be my 100th guest, too. It's been an incredible journey so far, so I'm pretty excited about this episode.
Dude, well, congratulations.
Thank you,
That's a
thank you.
great milestone.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. It's like I had a couple of them, but I gave up, or some of them are on like hiatus. Like we were talking off air, like there's some of them that are just on hiatus, but I'll probably bring them back. But for this one, I'm just happy I get to talk to fellow comics and all that good stuff. So, Compton, you grew up in Mobile, Alabama. You moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, and what are those two cities like?
Very, very different. It's only a couple of hours drive, but it feels like 10 years between being in the deep South and being north of the Mason-Dixon line. So Cincinnati it's just a more progressive town. Mobile is very much is an old money town. So it's a good size, and there's some things to do, but it doesn't have the things like the big Broadway shows that you have seasonal tickets to, stuff like that. So it's going from a mid-sized city to a big city, a legitimate big city. A place that has, instead of a triple A baseball team, you have a professional team. I guess that's one good analogy. When you're in a city that has a professional sports team, it's a whole nother world. But it's very crowded. Population density. The biggest difference between Mobile and Cincinnati for me was in Mobile there was really only one pocket. There's only one big group because there aren't enough people for there to be a lot of small little groups. Whereas in Cincinnati, if you wanted to hang out with more than just a couple of people that you had to travel around to the different places in Cincinnati because everybody's kind of spaced out more. And that was the biggest difference. Just when you have that many people packed into that small a place, it's things just get dense, and there's the options start to abound. So whereas in Mobile, it's like, let's go downtown. In Cincinnati, it's like, which downtown do you want to go to?
Indeed. I remember going there when I was a kid, and it was so humid at that time, and good gravy. And then we ended up going to Toronto because it was not too bad of a drive either from Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used to make the drive up to Windsor before I got into the casino industry. We would drive up to Windsor because my little brother wasn't old enough to come to the casinos with me in Indiana. So it's not far away, and it's like the promised land. You go up to Canada, and everything's cheaper, and it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Would you guys go for like vacations or just go for like day trips?
Just on a vacation from like Colorado to Cincinnati to there, but it's fantastic. And so, living in those two different worlds, it gave you a unique perspective on both the sides of the Mason-Dixie line, as you mentioned earlier. And I could only imagine going to one downtown and to seeing multiple downtowns, and I'm that's kind of like my hometown of Pueblo, Colorado. Is that we have one small town, but then when you go to Denver, it's like holy canola, that's just a lot of the areas to cover. So, and skyscrapers galore.
Yeah, I spent some time in Denver recently. I moved out during the quarantine, was there for about 6 months, and had planned on staying for a couple of years just to really learn about the cannabis industry. And some things ended up happening that brought me home a lot sooner, and gave me some good reasons to be back in Alabama sooner. But Colorado was a really good time. But oddly enough, my job was to drive, and I was a transport driver, and so I got to see exactly what you're talking about, the interstate running from Pueblo up to Denver. When you come through Colorado Springs, and you're like, oh, this is like a town, and then you get to Denver, and you're like, oh crap, there's traffic.
Yeah, big time. And that's why I love Pueblo, because there's hardly any traffic, and it's beautiful, like low cost of living and all that good stuff. But
it is beautiful out there for sure.
indeed,
I miss those views already.
Absolutely. Me too, and I can't wait to go back home. And you mentioned that you were a casino host, and before you went back to school, you were a casino host. But what was it like being a casino host?
It was crazy, man. Convincing Eskimos to buy ice with ketchup in it. It was nuts, but it was a lot of fun. My job was I was a casino host and a player development executive, and our job was to make the casino money. And so we would go and find VIP players, the top 1% of the players, the people that lose a lot of money, had a lot of money to lose, and we would convince them to come lose their money with us instead of other casinos. And sometimes that mostly you're just buying people off. We would host parties, and I was the guy that you would call if you wanted a limousine or concert tickets or anything like that. And if you were lucky enough to have my phone number, you were probably getting whatever you were calling for. And so my job was to basically be, an overrated concierge for the casino. But the perk to that was I got to go on all the adventures. So it was my job to play golf, take people to dinner, and take people to concerts and ride around in limousines. It was awesome.
Wow, that's
But
the life.
eventually that takes a toll on your soul. And when you see a lot of people that don't come out rosy on the other side, it gets tough. And so being in a casino all the time can be pretty depressing. And eventually I was 20 right before I turned 21 when I started in the casino industry. And by the time I left, I was 26, and that was enough. It was time for me to find another adventure. But it was fun. I saw some crazy things. I saw a couple $100,000 walk through the casino in a plastic bag, which, that's not the kind of thing you see on Main Street, but it was cool. Met a bunch of celebrities. The There was a lot of things that, being that age and being in that environment, a lot of lessons at that point in my life, which was good. It was a valuable experience.
Absolutely. Um, it's a heartbreaking thing. That's why I love playing free Texas Hold'em rather than put money into it. Because I'm
Yeah,
like, I lost money before, and I've been, I got double teamed, and they were speaking a different language, and I'm like, I can't do gambling anymore. Like with money involved, I'd much rather play for free. And
yeah,
it was just, but
more
those were
fun
the days. Yeah, it's much more fun that way, and make better friends.
for
And
sure.
so you went back to school to become an audio engineer. And what school did you go to, and what made you pick the field audio engineering?
Well, oddly enough, I never went to school for audio engineering. I actually went back to school for just to get my undergrad, to be in the business world. And at the time, I was considering having business degrees and going the business route and doing the MBA thing. And then the girl that inspired that dumped me, and so I went another direction. But I've always been more interested in philosophy. So when I went back to school, I got into um, the closest I got in business academically was philosophy, really, and communications is my area of expertise. I study rhetoric, um, which, after being in the casino, the art of bullshit comes in handy. I got pretty good at it, and then had always been interested in philosophy. So those two things kind of merged, and I didn't have to go through business school, which business school is really just a bunch of people that are quoting philosophers and scientists that they don't know and understand. So I was much more interested in the philosophical side, and ended up becoming an audio engineer because after grad school, I had some friends that were in a band, and me and academia had a falling out. I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do long term, and was just looking for something new. And I was at the University of Alabama for grad school, which is close to my home here in Alabama. And after my grandparents passed away, which was kind of the reason I chose to go to grad school in Alabama, was to be close to them. So after they passed away, I decided I was going to move back to Cincinnati for a while and just kind of get back into the business thing, pursue some job opportunities, and started hanging out with my friends that had a band that didn't really have anybody to be the bad guy. So they were getting screwed on getting payments for gigs and stuff like that. And I'm over 6 foot, 200 pounds. So I'm not the kind of guy that people, are willing to yell at publicly. So it was a lot easier for me to come in and make sure those guys got taken care of the way that they were supposed to get taken care of. So I managed them briefly. And in that time, being a musician in my own right, I'm a trumpet player and a tuba player. They had a need for somebody to run their sound, and it just kind of worked out that I was there, wanted to learn, and learned quick, and got to run sound for those guys. And then about a year and a half after I got into audio engineering, I ended up down at the Floribama, which is a very large music venue on the Gulf Coast. They run 5 stages, and so I became a good audio engineer in a hurry, and had a really good time while I was down there. But when I got done with that, I knew that wasn't going to be a long-term thing, just because audio engineers don't make great money. And so when that ended, I was looking around for something that I could do to eventually have a business here at home and still be able to travel and have fun. And I was considering getting back into the music side of it, but I'd never tried comedy. And so the choice of being on stage and being a musician or being a comic, I decided, well, we've done one. Let's go see if we can learn this other thing. And also, comedy is an impossible thing. Like it's very hard to do, and it's a very small club. So that was one of the things that drew me to it. Is have a have a propensity for public speaking to begin with. I love hearing myself talk, and so that made it easy for me to get on stage. And then it was just a matter of, and it still is a matter of, being funny, connecting with an audience, getting people to laugh. And that takes a really long time. I've only been at it for about 3.5 years, and I'm okay as a comic. I'm an okay comic. Um, but I don't think, like, I've had people tell me that you killed, but as far as like, I think there's a point in every comic's career where you killed, and I'm just not there yet. Like, I've had some good performances, but I would never say, oh yeah, I crushed it, I killed. It's at 3.5 years as a comic. I'm trying to be realistic about how long this is going to take. It's a process. It takes about 10 years. There are guys that have been doing it for 20 and 30 years and still aren't recognized. So I knew that wasn't going to be like, oh, let's get into comedy and make it famous. It's like, no, this is what I want to do and perform, and have an outlet, and it's subsidized by the rest of my financial endeavors.
Indeed, most definitely. And we have similar paths. Like I went to school for communications, and it took me 7 years to get it done. But I did it all for my parents, and I've only met my maternal grandparents like 3 times, but they meant the world to me. When I flew out to Cambodia to meet them, and I used to manage a band too. So, and I looked intimidating, but I didn't mean to. I'm like 5'6", so I'm nowhere near your height. But I made sure they got paid. But I asked for 10%, but they only gave me 1%, and so it wasn't that caused a breakup, but it was just the drama behind the scenes. You know how bands are; it's all those egos, and it's just like
Oh
I
yeah,
can't
I
deal with this
remember.
anymore. Yeah,
I
so that's
remember
why I
those
went to
days.
comedy too.
Yeah, that dude. Yeah, we could share some stories for sure. But yeah, drama behind the scenes. And it's one of the crazy things. It you never goes away. Like in anything, you have to deal with people, and unfortunately, we end up dealing at lowest common denominator levels. And so even the business side of comedy is drama. Anytime people are involved, we're just messy little critters when it comes to that. But so Cambodia is where your family's from, where your grandparents are from, anyway.
Yep, and my parents are too, and so I'm like first generation here, so it's
Yeah,
pretty.
I know nothing about Cambodia. Do they have a stand-up comedy scene in Cambodia?
There are some clubs there.
Really?
I heard people like they've performed there, and I haven't yet, but they understand English, so I guess it's pretty neat. And there's some, like, when I went to the big temple there called Angkor Wat, there's some kids that spoke like 6 different languages because they have to do that for like the tourists. And I'm
Mhm.
like, wow, kids can learn like 6 different languages and not like lose a beat. It was insane. So it's
Wow.
wild.
Yeah, just mentioning Angkor Wat, I'm a big fan of history. I do a lot of history research. And so I don't know a ton about Cambodia, like I was saying, but I'm very fascinated in places like Angkor Wat that have these extremely long lineages that are very, very well documented. Like, and this wouldn't be Cambodia, I guess, but when they found the remains of Dwarka in the Indian Ocean, where it was supposed to be. Like, I don't know if you remember that a couple of years back, but that's a big deal, man. To find Shiva's city, very, very cool stuff. So anyway, sorry, you piqued my interest with the. As soon as you said Angkor Wat, I got distracted. I was like,
And
tell me stuff. Teach me some history.
yeah, so yeah, I've been there twice, and like I climbed to the top of it, and the stairs are so small that you have to climb with your hands and feet or hold onto the metal railing there. But
Yeah.
once you get to the top and make your way back down, it's just an amazing experience. And it's just like walking into like you go to a museum and you walk into a painting, and if you can walk into a painting, that's the exact feeling. It's just an amazing experience, and so I highly recommend it. And you'd have the time of your life there.
Well, I'm going to go and you're going to be my tour guide. How about that? Like,
That'd be pretty rad.
we go together. I need somebody to show me around. Like I said, I don't know shit. I'm just, dumb dude watching YouTube.
Indeed, and I can translate for you because I speak the language, so it'll work out.
I need this.
Indeed, most definitely. Yeah, and English was my second language, but or is my second language, but got to hang on to those Cambodian dialect, so it's pretty awesome, I think. And so, um, let's see here. You've collected a lot of experiences as well, like and on your new journey, um all that good stuff. And what are some of your favorite experiences that you stayed during your stand-up sets?
Oh man. Well, right now comedy is for me very much a recent thing. Not just in that I've only been doing it for 3.5 years, but in the way that I see comedy. So I think about the shows that I had over the weekend. I had the pleasure of doing a lot of comedy this last week. I was in Panama City on Wednesday. Shout out to Emma Franco and Panama City Comedy for having me. I was in Birmingham on Thursday, and then Panama City, and then Tuscaloosa. So it was a good busy weekend. And so when I think of the best times that I've had recently, where I am as a comic is I'm getting better at crowd work. And so some of the most fun I've had on stage recently has been crowds that are a little lively, that I can control and kind of play with. Because it's the exploration of the idea that material is what you do when you run out of things to talk about. I think Norm Macdonald said that. And so learning that skill and practicing that skill has a lot to do with where I'm at. And when I get to practice that and just interact with people, I have a lot of fun right now. But there's also been some where getting to do some tight fives in Colorado was one of the best, because anytime you get to be around new people and new comics and get their feedback or can just watch for their reactions, that's a lot of fun. Being at an open mic and doing well and getting a lot of laughs is not always the norm. We're used to going to open mics, and comics, we're not the best crowd. We laugh on the inside. And
So true.
so to be at an open mic in Colorado and meeting people for the first time and get genuine laughs out of comics, that's exciting. So those would probably be some of the categories that are up there.
Absolutely. And you were
Best
exposed to stand-up comedy when you're at a young age. And what are your early memories of stand-up?
Gallagher. When I was a kid, really young, like 8-10 years old ish. I was born in 1980, and Gallagher put out in, I think it was 1983, 84, something like that, put out a leap year marathon special. That was 4 hours long, and it was all of his material, all of his specials, and him doing sketches in the middle. And I think this was for HBO or Showtime. It was one of those New Year's Eve late night things. But my father had recorded it and was a fan of Gallagher. So we would take road trips to see my grandparents, and the tape was 4 hours long. We never had to drive 4 hours, but we would put that tape on in the car and listen to Gallagher for hours and hours and hours on these road trips, over and over and over again, to the point that we could quote the bits. And that was my first taste of it. And then the rest of it came, we would watch Johnny Carson sometimes with my parents and see some of those comics that came through the Carson show. And then when we got a little bit older, when I was in middle school, when my brother and I were both in middle school at the time, and my dad would take us we went and saw Gallagher live, which was still when Gallagher was touring, not his brother. I think I could be wrong about that, but We got to see one of the Gallagher shows. I was so young, I didn't even realize that there were two Gallaghers. I didn't know about his brother and all that stuff. And then I also got to see Carrot Top perform because Carrot Top was breaking at the time. He had just had the incident at the Stardome where he lost all his stuff. It's that whole story. And so those were the two that I had the biggest memories of. And then eventually, because I was interested in comedy, when Comedy Central came around, I had a television that wasn't in the family room. And so that's what I would watch in the middle of the night was comedy stuff. And eventually got to know Carlin. And I was a big fan of Mel Brooks and his movies. And one of the lines that always stuck with me was Mel Brooks at one point in History of the World Part 1 says, I'm a stand-up philosopher. And so that laid the groundwork for me understanding comedy at a young age, like the grandiose thing behind it. I didn't quite understand all of the details of that at the time, but the groundwork was there. So as I watched comedy over time, and then after that, seeing Carlin with that concept of philosophy and the spoken word, was like, yeah, this really can be stand-up philosophy. And so that was kind of the thing that pushed me down that road. And then being a communications guy, it kind of became inevitable. Like sooner or later, we're going to try this. I just hadn't really thought about it until later on. I just didn't think of myself as that kind of funny. Like I knew I could get on stage and talk, but I don't make people laugh very often. So I'm still learning how to do that.
Indeed. And speaking of spoken word, you call stand-up the last great bastion for the spoken word, and I couldn't agree more. Because just being there and bearing your soul and up on stage is pretty scary, but at the same time, if you can make people laugh by doing that, it's just the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, I've been saying that for a long time. I'm sure it's attributed to somebody else. I'm sure somebody else said that before me. I think I might have gotten it from Carlin or somebody else, but it's the same concept as stand-up philosophy. And if you look at what's happened in comedy, or just since I've been involved, like Hannah Gadsby came out with her spoken word show that everybody was up in arms, like this isn't stand-up comedy, because she focused on trauma. It was very much a one-woman show / comedy, but it ended up in the comedy world because that if someone's standing on stage alone with a microphone and people are laughing, it's going to be labeled as stand-up comedy. And having seen stuff like that, especially now where you've got people doing Zoom stuff, there was a guy who recorded a special without an audience. And so comedy is still the realm of, it is the last place that you can stand and talk and not be interrupted. And, Broadway to a certain extent with the one-man plays. But those, you never see a theater production delve into crowd work like you do in some of these specials. Like you listen to Patrice O'Neill and, those guys come out and start a show with crowd work and just tear it up. Jesus Christ. Like it's just off the top of this guy's head. So it's a space that that we have a lot more freedom to say stuff than a lot of other places. The great debate of what you can and can't say on stage and cancel culture and all that nonsense is it comes down to if you can make it funny. If you can make it funny and people laugh, then you could say, go for it. Say whatever you want. I mean, you got to deal with the ramifications if shit goes sideways. But it's the only place where you have the opportunity and a little bit of grace if you fail. There are levels to that, but yeah, you're not going to find a lot of people challenging authority from corporate America. That's one of the reasons that I got out of corporate America, is because you don't get to say and do. They have dress codes and codes of conduct, and don't need any of that. There is none of that on a comedy stage. There's some, there are a few things that are historic. Like some people give me shit for wearing a kilt all the time because you can see my calves, and traditionally people wear pants, but it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it's the rules in comedy are very much pliable because there's no manual, there's no book. Everybody does it their own way, and that's cool. There aren't a lot of spaces like that out there.
Indeed, most definitely. And speaking of one man shows, and I'm putting one together. Well, during quarantine, I got selected for the Orlando Fringe, and I'm like super excited to perform like four shows there. And it's like two-part storytelling and one part stand up. It's called Stories on Sunset, and like the middle part is called Stories on Sunset. And I share the stories of my concert journalism days as a stand up concert journalist in LA. And so
Mhm.
it's on Sunset Boulevard, and just nothing but all my fun stories from there. So getting to see all my favorite musicians perform, they're like it's just fantastic. So can't wait to do that one. But this the last part is going to be intense because it's my coming of age story, but it's
Mhm.
like really graphic. So I can't wait to share that with the people. So
That'll
I'm
be
like,
very cool.
and the comics in Daytona Beach call me the cleanest, dirtiest comic in Daytona Beach because I say all these really dirty things, but I don't say a curse word, and so they find it fascinating. So
That's great, man. Well, congratulations on the dates. That's
uh,
uh that's gonna be a lot of fun. Yeah, I was just listening to Ray Romano has this bit about being in the shower, and he says without saying all of the things that you should not say for a clean comedy set. But he does this, and you know he's talking about pissing and masturbating in the shower and never actually says it, which is a great little piece of wordplay, an implication. And so yeah, and that's the first thing I thought of when you said you say horrible things, but you don't actually say anything bad.
yep.
It can be done. It can be done really well.
Indeed, most definitely. And Compton, you're a co-founder of Stinger's Comedy and
Mhm,
Azalea City Comedy.
mhm.
And how did you find those? And who's your co-founder and all that good stuff?
So Stinger's Comedy came about because I started doing comedy in Pensacola, and there was only one show in town. They had an open mic on Wednesdays, or they had an open mic on Tuesdays, I think it was, and they would do a showcase on Fridays. And eventually, I got good enough to be asked to do the showcase, and it was the first time I had ever gotten paid. And it was a crash course in you know, how hard it is to make a living as a comic. Um, which I knew, but I wanted to try and make a living in comedy as fast as possible. And so the route to making money was definitely not because I was funny. I knew that was going to take a very long time. So I went the production side because I've got the experience with the audio equipment. I've got the experience with dealing with bar owners, and logistically had the means to do the traveling and to make it happen. So I was about 6 months into comedy and started asking around um, to run shows, to set up shows, and had talked to the guys that ran the show at the back porch was the name of it, and eventually found out there was a comic in Pensacola that I hadn't met yet, but used to run a show out in the area that I was looking to run a show. So I gave her a call and we talked, and um, her name's Emily Dillon. And Emily had just she'd taken a year off to deal with a cancer diagnosis, and hadn't really planned on getting back into the game. And I told her, I said, look, I need to learn. I'll do the legwork if you can help show me the ropes and get this ball rolling. And so Stinger's Comedy was born, and we've had the opportunity to do some pretty cool stuff. Once we're well past the pandemic, Stinger's Comedy has a charity arm, which is called Killing Cancer with Comedy. And unfortunately, we had to cancel some of our big charity shows because of the pandemic, as everybody did. And it was an effort just to bring more comedy to the area. The only way to get better as a comic is to get your reps in, right? And if you only have a couple of opportunities a week, you can either drive really, really far to somewhere that has it, or you can make it. And I had the pleasure of meeting Steve Hofstetter early on in my career, and um, he did a show in Mobile, and I got to talk to him briefly afterwards. And there weren't a lot of people there, so we got to hang out for a few minutes. And his advice was just go run a show. The best way to learn is to go do it, and if nobody else is doing it, just go do it. And that's a dude I really look up to, and so I took that and ran with it. And out of that, we had Stinger's Comedy in the works at the time, but Mobile only had one show a week and one venue doing comedy. There'd been a few attempts by some other people to do some things around downtown Mobile, and just not a whole lot of shows. So again, just wanted to make opportunities. So started talking to people, and it was actually another Mobile comic called Carson Taylor that was helping me out at the beginning of that. It was originally called Smoky Jokes, and it was a collective of comics that were mostly on the shows, and we had gotten to the point where I was able to pass some shows off to some people, but we never were able to get. We never got to completion. Like, we got started on a lot of stuff, but we never really got to see that through. And after the quarantine hit, I left town, and a lot of those comics are working for the Music Box in Mobile now. And because it's just time, so much time's passed, and we've got some plans to do some other things in Mobile. We wanted to appeal to an older demographic, for one. So changing the name to Azalea City Comedy just seems, it's a little more grown up. It's an evolution, and we have a different group of people working on it now. But that's pretty much the story behind those two. They came about as a need for there to be more comedy in the area. The goal with both of the production companies was to get comics paid what they deserve, and we did. We paid a lot of comics, and it was a lot of fun. I got a crash course in how not to run shows, because we made all the mistakes. But that's how you learn. And so thankfully, it also, being a producer in comedy, opens a lot of doors in comedy to get on other people's shows and stuff like that. It's part of the game of the business side. So I knew I wanted to have that chip in my pocket to eventually play if need be.
Indeed, and so true. Like, I live in the middle of Daytona, Jacksonville, and Orlando, pretty much, and it's like there's just one open mic, but they have like every other week. So it's like I gotta travel just to go to one mic to do 5 minutes, and it's just like, and it's just true what Steve said. If you build it, they will come. And in Pueblo, where I'm from, like there's like a open mic there, and like maybe a comedy show here and there. But everyone looks forward to my festival that I have there, which is like annually, and we're going on 8 years. And it's like you said, that having that chip in your pocket,
Yeah.
and it's the business side. It's like it's pretty neat to have that, and like it's like now it's the most anticipated event of the summer for everyone, and it's like it's pretty dope. I dig
That's
it.
Well, now I've got an excuse to come back to Colorado. I can't wait.
Indeed, for sure. You gotta check it out. It's pretty neat, and I'm bringing it to Daytona Beach too. So I gotta pay back everyone that gave me stage time. So I tried to bring everyone to Colorado, but it was too expensive. So I'm like, I'll just start another one here, and just put everyone that I couldn't bring to that festival. And they have bike week. So instead of bike week, we're having stand up comedy week, and it's gonna be like a whole week of stand up comedy. So it's gonna be pretty dope at my homeroom in Daytona Beach. So it's gonna be awesome.
That's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So
I can't
um
wait to see the details on that one. I might be able to. I can make Daytona Beach. Like I said, I was just in Panama City a couple of nights ago. So you're only 6 more hours from there, 4 more hours from there. Anyway,
yep.
yeah.
And it's perfect
Let's
room
go.
for stand up too, like the low ceilings, and it's just like the perfect lighting for a stage and everything. It's just perfect. The sound is amazing. It's just
Yeah.
awesome.
Isn't that one of the crazy things that you learn? Like, as you learn all the different pieces, the craziest part of the formula for me is the room, because it's something that is so easily overlooked, um, and can make or break any situation. Like just the layout of room, and just the way everything's oriented can be a real deal breaker. And so you get in random conversations about different venues, and you're like, this is easier to manage than that, just because of the shape of it, and losing all that. It's like the difference of being outside. If you got really high ceilings, it's hard to wrangle that energy, because it's bouncing all over the place. The things you never think about the first couple of times you do comedy, until you really get into the producer side, and you're like, oh, this is why that works. And I guess you don't have to be on the producer side to see that, but it's one of those pieces that you don't think about early in the game, and then later on you're like, oh, this matters.
Yep. big time. And in Colorado, I have to make it. If the pandemic still happens, I have to have it outside. So it's gonna be like 4 days of everything outside. But I just love being inside. But whatever happens to keep it going is it's all right with me. But you have two podcasts, and one's called Truth, Love, and Peace, and the other one's called Burning the Set List. And how did those come in form together? Like those
Well,
two separate entities, anyway.
Burning the Set List is the recent one. We actually have an episode tonight coming up with Kirby Hullett and Olivia Searcy from Pensacola. Both great comedians and showrunners in their own right. And that came about with my co-host, the co-founder of the podcast. His name is Governor, the Governor. He's a comic out of Biloxi, Mississippi, and great dude. Really great dude. And we wanted to do something fun. He invited me to come do a podcast with a mutual friend of ours, a mutual acquaintance. And that didn't seem like the kind of thing that we wanted to do. And since I've got the technological background, we decided we would just throw everything together and do our own. So we called on some friends of mine to help get the ball rolling, and we did. And it's similar to this. What we do is we like watching old material. So we'll get a comic on, play some of their really old clips, talk about where those jokes came from, how they've developed, and just go through the old set lists and do the analysis and talk about them. And so that's a fun way to get stories out of comics. And that's a good podcast. You can check it out, Burning the Set List. It's on YouTube and Facebook now. It's coming everywhere else eventually. But Truth, Love, and Peace was my first podcast, and it was a solo podcast. I did it just by myself. And the reason I did it was because when I lived in Perdido Key and was working for the Floribama, my friend and I, Kurt Brewer, shout out to that dude, he's amazing, decided that we were going to set up a pirate radio station. And by pirate radio, I mean multiple felonies, and broadcast it on the Key. And so we did. We were on 93.5 FM between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. when we were pretty sure nobody would be listening. And we ran a live radio show from my camper down on the beach, and had such a good time doing it that we had started live streaming some of the episodes to Facebook. And when we stopped doing the radio show, I just kept doing the live streams. And eventually that became Truth, Love, and Peace, because I enjoy sitting down and philosophizing with people, and I have the opportunity to know some pretty cool storytellers and some people that have had some cool experiences. And so finding an excuse to sit them down and make them focus on something for 2 hours at a time, that was the easiest way to do it. And it was a lot of fun, and I couldn't keep inviting people to the camper. So I came up with a rig that I could take pretty much anywhere, and do all the things that I needed to do. And it's worked out really well. I mean, it gave me an opportunity to do a lot of extra stuff in comedy, getting to sit down with other comics. And so it was very educational, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed just long conversations, real deep stuff. And so that was my excuse to do that. And I did it. I took a little bit of a break before the pandemic, and then the pandemic was like, yeah, you're definitely not doing this for a while. So I've put that one aside for now, and I probably will bring it back eventually. I keep wanting to bring it back, but it just, it's taking its time and doing its own thing. But I think there's 60 episodes on truthloveandpeace.com. Anybody can go check them out. You can find that one on all the podcast platforms too. But it's on YouTube and in a couple of places, and it's fun. I like talking, and I like having conversations with people. So any excuse to do that, which again, thanks for having me on here, because this is definitely fun. But yeah, so that's the story behind the podcast. There's another one that I'd like to do. Like, I see people that do the news podcasts and stuff. Like The Hill is a really good one. They put out these short episodes, but there's so much editing that goes into something on that level. I just don't want to be, and it's too depressing to be involved in the news right now, to be perfectly honest. So I have an idea for one that I would like to do, but it's still waiting. It's still waiting. But yeah, I like podcasts.
Indeed. I'm a fan of long conversations like this. Like when it comes to like small talk, I just can't handle it. I'm just like these small talks don't mean anything, but I love like having a long conversations like podcasting like this and having you as my guest and being my 100th guest is awesome and I made sure that I put all your podcast links on the bottom so you can watch them and listen to them. So they're in the description box below. Um, and content. These are the questions I wanted to ask you. We touched base on it earlier. Oh, I got to give a shout out to Emma and Olivia because they were my guests on the show too, like prior in these first 100 episodes. So with that being said, Compton, these are the questions I wanted to ask you. If because I was gonna go on tour, but I couldn't make it happen because of the whole pandemic thing. So with that being said, Compton, what inspired you to perform stand-up comedy?
Ego. A lot of ego. I'd always been a fan of comedy, like I said, and when I ended up having more time, when I quit audio engineering for the Bama, I was looking for something else to do, and so I was getting on stage from time to time, playing trumpet with some friends of mine, and enjoyed being on stage. It was fun, and I wandered into the open mic at the back porch and came and hung out a couple of times. Just wanted to kind of check it out. And as soon as I did, I had the same thought that everybody has. You see somebody that, you know, maybe working on a joke or something misses at an open mic, and you think to yourself, oh, well, I can be funnier than that. I'm like, well, maybe, but at what cost? And so I was there. I got to see some really good comics, and I got to see some people that I thought were about on my level. And I was like, I'm going to do this. I can do this. At the worst case scenario, I can get up there and fail. If I see people failing, well, if I'm not even doing that, then I'm not really in the game. And so all of those thoughts came together. It's like, I should try this. Let's find out if I can do this. And so I put together a little 5 minutes that I've brought back once or twice, and it's never gone as well as it did the first time. But my first time on stage, I got some laughs, and Olivia Searcy was actually the person that introduced me. She was hosting that night, so she was the first person to ever introduce me on stage as a wannabe comic, and from there, I got bit by the bug, had to do it. But that was the first time I went to an open mic with the idea of this might be a possibility. And when I saw real people doing it to varying degrees of success, which is typical for an open mic, then I was motivated. It was like, all right, if anybody else can do this, I can do this. Let's figure it out.
Indeed.
And as a comic, like I said, ego was a big thing. I think anytime you want to hear yourself talk, there's a little bit of ego involved, but it's also a matter of accomplishment. Knowing how hard comedy is was one of the things that I love about it. Knowing, because everybody's like, oh, I can get up there and talk and be funny. People that have never done it don't really realize. I didn't really realize how hard it is until I got up there, because it's one thing to get up and talk. It's another thing to get up and be funny. To make people laugh on demand is very, very difficult. And it's kind of preposterous in a lot of ways that people go and listen to comedy. So it's this anomalous thing that is very difficult to do, that requires a lot of attention and a lot of skill. And that's fascinating to me. I like difficult things. It's been in martial arts all my life for that exact reason. I like there to be a struggle. And so I knew that it was something that would be really hard, but the payoff was amazing, because you end up, if you can make any real headway as a comic, then you end up in this small group of people that have accomplished something that is very, very difficult, that most people are too terrified to even try. And I like all of those things. I like a good challenge, and it's a cool thing to say. I'm part of a small group of people that can do this. And that doesn't mean that I'll ever make it to be a household name as a comic, but it just feels good to know that you can do something that maybe 3 other people in the room can do. Like when you're at a show and you're hanging out with comics and you're like, these people can get on stage and do this, and these people just came to laugh. I like being in the little group, not the big group.
Indeed, most definitely. What was the feeling like when you first performed stand up?
It was fun. I had a really good time because I was barely paying attention to how other people reacted. Like I wanted people to laugh, but it was more about just getting up there and accomplishing the thing. And so once I did and didn't bomb horribly my first time, I mean, I'm sure it was a bomb, but I remember getting a couple of laughs, and I remember a couple people afterwards saying nice things, and that was enough to really get the ball rolling, being like, this is possible. And it was fun. It was a hell of a drug. Having an excuse to be on stage is fun. Like people that want to pay attention, and then getting people to want to pay attention to you. It's exhilarating. And so yeah, the first time was a blast. And of course that sets you up for not knowing what it feels like to bomb. When you start off on a good note, that first bomb hurts real bad.
Yeah, it
And
does.
there've been plenty of those.
Indeed.
Plenty of those.
Most definitely. That's all part of the process, and you got to trust it. So,
Yeah, I mean it's fun though because being at 3.5 years, like I said, I'm an okay comic. I know that I can get some laughs. I'm good enough to get booked on some shows, and that's really fun because for a long time, you're nervous. You're really nervous about going on stage. Like I still get nervous about what if I bomb tonight? What if people don't like the material? All that kind of stuff. But the more you do it, the more that confidence grows. And you're like, okay, well, I have the tools. I've practiced long enough to have the tools that if I work hard, I can make this work. We can all have a good time here. And so the nervousness becomes excitement in a way. So I'm still nervous before I get on stage, but for the most part, I'm excited because it's potential. Like I have the tools to make it go well. I know that it could go horribly wrong, but if I use those tools correctly, then we're going to have a really good time. And so it becomes an opportunity to try and control chaos. And sometimes it works. If you're really good, you make it work most of the time. You fail less often. But in the process, like you said, sooner or later you misstep. Like even last night, I had a good set last night. It was fun, but I screwed up the ending. I told my closer at the wrong time, and I had a plan. I was like, all right, well, this is my normal closer. I'm going to do this here, and then I'm going to follow it up with this new stuff. Well, then I get on stage, and the closer goes really well, and I'm just like, okay, well, now my plan goes out the window because I didn't prepare it as diligently as I should have. So I knew like the joke selection was my fault, and it wasn't the biggest out I've ever had. And so that's a failure in and of itself, because I know that I can do better than that. And it was a choice that I made that brought us to that point. It's not the crowd's fault. So there are always little moments to learn from, but that's part of the process, like you said. And being able to identify that stuff, actually listening to the tapes, which it was one of the craziest things about our podcast is we ask comics to do the thing they hate to do most, which is watch themselves. So the fact that anybody will come on and do it is amazing. But going back and listening to tapes and being able to make them better and hear ways to make them better, that's the most painful part of the process, is having to listen to your failures. But it's the only way you make them better.
most definitely. Indeed. And uh, and we spoke a lot about Carlin and Gallagher. We touched base on them. And what are your other favorite comedy specials and comedy record albums?
Well, I'm a big Jimmy Carr fan because I cannot write jokes the way that he writes jokes. Like the one special where he comes out and cranks out like 60 jokes in 2 minutes. It's amazing. Unfortunately, I'm still learning to write jokes, one-liners, concise jokes like that. I do more story bit stuff. And so Jimmy Carr is one of those guys that is amazing. I hope to be able to evade taxes as well as he did for a minute there. And but then there's one guy that doesn't get a lot of attention. At least I've never heard other comics talk about him. But there was an album that I listened to just over and over and over for about the last 6-7 months. A comedian by the name of Ryan Stout. I think he worked with Chelsea Hadler for a long time. but he's an incredible comic, and he's got an album called The Man in the Suit. And his ability to just take the turn and force people to laugh at stuff they're uncomfortable with is kind of the theme of the album. And he does it so well. It's the album that I go to and just listen. How did he do that? Like, how did he think to get to there? And when I came across him, that's kind of something that I was wanting to learn how to do more. And so I just ate it up, just listened to it on repeat to try and figure out what this guy was doing. And it's not impossible what he's doing. He's just very, very good at it. So that album meant a lot over the last year for me, because I would always come back to it and be like, you can really crush. Like, this comedy can be really great. And then you get into the more popular people. Like, I'm a big fan of Mark Maron. Love what he does. There's a guy that also doesn't get enough credit, that kind of steered me towards comedy, or at least he was the first comic that I ever knew. His name is Josh Sneed. Great comic out of Cincinnati, Ohio. Toured with the Blue Collar Guys for a while. And he's got a dry bar special out if anybody wants to go check that out. But Josh Sneed, he and I were playing poker together in Cincinnati at one point in time. And I like Josh. When you know somebody personally, it makes it that much easier. But yeah, so Josh was a big influence. I remember being at one of the shows that he recorded, and watching his successes and him do what he was good at. And that was pretty inspirational, because he's a cool dude. As far as other comics, I mean, you've got the greats. Patrice is one of the best. Dave Chappelle is probably the current GOAT, undisputedly. Jon Stewart, not so much from the stand-up side, gets a lot of credit for everything he did with The Daily Show. There's a long list of people that I pay attention to. Carlin was the guy that I read the books, knew all the specials, could recite most of his material as a kid. But then, I remember watching Eddie Murphy, that first special that he did, and that red leather jumpsuit, and nobody forgets that. I mean, if you're in the world of jokes, nobody forgets Eddie Murphy crashing onto the scene, because he was also in the movie culture at the time. And so that dude was super relevant, and was incredibly funny, and hopefully is going to make a comeback. So can't wait to see Eddie Murphy doing his thing on stage again. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard Coming to America 2 was pretty good. I've heard mixed reviews, but overall, I think it was pretty entertaining. Just to plug that dude's work. As far as other crazy comics, I listen to comedy all the time. So John Mulaney, I don't know if you keep up with Mulaney and Kroll. Those guys do incredible work. Like, Mulaney will be, if he continues down the path that he's on, I think he's in the running for being the GOAT very, very soon. Because just an incredible writer, does incredible stuff. Like, I can remember the first Mulaney bit I ever heard was his, the diner. I can't remember the full name of the title, but it's the diner bit where they go in and they mess with everybody in this little diner. And and then Mulaney kind of took off after I found that. So I caught him right at the beginning. And he's one of those guys that I don't listen to as much as I would probably like, because he's so good, it kind of bothers me. Like, it reminds me of how much work I have to do. But he's an incredible talent. He's a lot of fun to listen to. And I mean, I could go on and on. I'm sure I could keep digging up comics names if you really wanted me to.
Indeed.
There's a couple.
For sure. And a lot of those guys have been on film and have been on, or a lot of those folks have been on TV and film. And I want to know your favorite sitcom, sketch shows, and comedy films are.
Comedy film would either be Blazing Saddles or History of the World Part 1. One of those two. Young Frankenstein. All the Mel Brooks stuff is right up there. Spaceballs. I can remember watching Spaceballs a ton when we were kids. Favorite sketch stuff, since I am not as good at improv and sketch stuff, so it's not really something I pay a lot of attention to. But I think the work that Mulaney and Kroll and that crew did with Big Mouth which is the cartoon on Netflix. That's a really funny show. Really enjoy that one. As far as sketch comedy goes, who would I say? Like, I grew up with Whose Line Is It Anyway? So Drew Carey and those guys. Um, that was the first sketch comedy that I was really aware of outside of SNL, I guess. Um, but yeah, and I mean nowadays with YouTube, um, the version of like what John Oliver did that Andrew Schultz eventually picked up and started copying or putting his own spin on. It's just a formula. Um, that I do watch a lot of that stuff, just because having all the acronyms, I like right now I've got 4 screens in front of me, so I'm used to consuming a lot of information nearly simultaneously. Like, can't do 2 things at once, but you can switch back and forth really quickly. And Andrew Schultz is always on in the background, and some of those short clips are so intense and so full that you have to pay attention, and I like that. That's something that I'd like to be able to learn how to do. Is my tempo is something that I think a lot about right now, and I have moments on stage where I will ease into the deep radio voice, and then there are other times on stage where a faster pace, my voice goes up, and I can see that difference. And so watching guys like Schultz and Jimmy Carr and figuring out how to write better jokes that are more concise and just one-liners is something that's really appreciative. Like when you don't give people the option to tune out when you have that tempo control and that pace control. So I like watching those guys that are really good at it. Anyway, just Schultz is crushing it. You know what I mean?
Most definitely. And if you can go on tour with any comedian locally and internationally known, which comedians would you like to go on tour with?
Locally and internationally known, Hofstadter's at the top of that list. Like, if you look at guys that run game on their own and the system be damn, Steve Hofstadter is the pinnacle of that. So if I could get in with anybody, that would be one of the guys to get in with, just because I think not only is he an incredible comic, he's a very intelligent and well thought out business player, and does it really well. So if anybody needs lessons on how to build a brand and put out content and all that good stuff, Hofstadter's the guy that's been crushing it for a decade. So that would be a very, very valuable experience. And when you get the opportunity to learn from somebody like that, that's huge, man. That you can't buy that kind of wisdom.
Indeed.
As far as locals go, Govna and I, my buddy on the podcast, we've actually done some tours together. Well, I say tours, out of town dates, and we have a lot of fun traveling. The other guys that I really enjoy traveling with have gotten to do some more shows with. There's a gentleman by the name of Michael Statham up in Birmingham, and he travels around a good bit. I've been hanging out with him, and Eugene Henry runs a show in Birmingham, so I've been getting to see them regularly and do some shows with those guys, and that's a lot of fun. Meeting new comics and getting into new circles, going to new rooms, it's a really good time. As far as people that I haven't traveled with that I'd like to, Scott Eason is a Huntsville comic that I will confidently say it should be in anyone's top 3 comics in Alabama, if not the funniest comic that I know in Alabama. He is the funniest comic that I know in Alabama, and that would be a guy it would be really cool to get to travel with him, because he's so good and he has so much experience that it would be a good learning opportunity to get to watch. I had the pleasure of watching him work last night, and it's fun. He's really good at what he does, and it's entertaining. And it's entertaining to me. Of course, it's entertaining. Comics entertain people all the time, but it's entertaining to me. And so that would, I think, be a really good thing to get to hang out with Scott on a more regular basis. Just because, I mean, if that guy doesn't make it to the next level, then there's something wrong, because he's He's really good, and he's done some big stuff, and he's got some more big stuff coming. So good on him. Scott Easton's fucking amazing. I could suck his dick for another 10 minutes. But yeah, let's see who else. That'd probably be the tops in Alabama.
Indeed, and if you can get roast, we spoke of Patrice O'Neill earlier, and he was known for some of his roast jokes. And if you can get roasted by 5 comedians, past and present, which comedians would you have to get roasted by?
Don Rickles, right at the top. Carlin didn't do a whole lot of roast stuff, but so Don Rickles and Jeff Ross, you got to take a shot from both of those guys. Who else? I kind of like to hear Milton Berle's take on this, and Mulaney, and Chappelle. I think that would pretty much cover the gamut.
Indeed. And where do you see your comedy journey in the next 5 years?
Well, in the next 5 years, some of the things that I've got going on, the Mobile Comedy Festival is happening again this year in August. So we hope to keep that going on. That's the brainchild of Zeke Buckholst and Toulouse down in Mobile. Would like to bring back some kind of comedy festival to Pensacola. We did one with the Indie Arts Council 2 years ago now, which was really fun. We had a good time. I'd like to see that continue. I do a lot of work in Panama City. I run a show there once a month, soon to be twice a month, at a place called Slapsticks Cues and Brew. So I'd like to see some more big things happen in Panama City. I want to create some excuses to work with Emma, to be perfectly honest. She's so cool, and really appreciate her keeping me working. So I'd like to do some stuff with her to help grow the Panama City scene. I see in the next 5 years me doing more touring and less show running. Right now, I swore I wasn't going to get back into it when I got back from Colorado, and then lo and behold, if you want to do comedy in Alabama, you got to create some space. So I go to Florida. No. But yeah, as the business develops, as my business outside of comedy develops, that means less and less energy I want to put into the production side of comedy, and eventually would like to transition to just doing more tours. I don't think that there will ever be a no producing shows part. But it would be nice to do mostly tours. But unfortunately, in the Southeast, there are only so many options. You can only do so much. And, knowing my limitations, I could probably get booked on more shows than I could be as funny as possible on. So not to say that there aren't shows out there. It's not like Atlanta where you can get on stage 5-7 nights a week and roll with it. So yeah, I mean, to be realistic about it, there's always going to be a need, or right now there is a need in the Southeast for people to run shows. So I don't see ever giving that up, but hopefully I'll be doing more touring. The goal behind having the business here at my farm is to be able to work here pretty intensively over the summer, and then be able to do a lot of traveling in the winter. So hopefully I'll be able to do the next 5 years. That'll look like me doing small regional stuff in the summertime, and in the wintertime is when I'd really like to start expanding my tour range, which right now the farthest I've been, Nashville, Atlanta, Tallahassee, New Orleans, and Hattiesburg. So I'd like to make that bigger. I'd like to get out to Arkansas, and I'd like to start touring into the clubs. Like, I've held off for a really long time on trying to get into a lot of festivals and a lot of things like that. Just, honing the craft, not trying to overreach. And now I'm to a point where it's time to start doing some of that stuff. So the next 5 years will definitely include more submissions for travel and for out of town shows, out of town festivals. But then again, that's you got to come up with a good tape. Everybody wants to see a good tape, and I had one of those the other night where nobody was rolling the camera, but we all got the audio recording. Yeah, if only I could send that to the club. There have been some times where it's like, look, I'm gonna send this killer audio recording, and if you can't figure out the rest from the picture, I can't help you.
Indeed, most definitely. And I had the honor of interviewing Zeke on here, and he's a fantastic dude, and that was a great interview as well. And Compton, which other forms of comedy would you like to venture off into, like improv, sketch, comedy writing, acting, directing, etc.?
Well, I've dabbled in some voice acting, so I'll pursue that on and off. That's one of those where if somebody wants to pay me to talk, feel free. Other than that, I kind of make my own excuses to talk. But acting is one of those things that gets you in front of a large audience to make the transition. It is a very valuable tool to grow your audience. And I definitely wouldn't pass up those opportunities, but I'm not out there trying to create those opportunities. Actually have a sister that is an actress. So I'm sure if I tried, I could get in front of some people. But that's not my priority at the moment. Improv is something that I have been loosely around just because they're comics that are improv people, but not very intensively. I don't usually participate in improv. I have reservations about the way my brain functions in a timely fashion, and so improv for me is very hard. And so that keeps me from doing it. Sooner or later, I'm sure I will be involved in a little more improv. But mostly over the next 5 years, as far as what I want to get into, is really just being good at stand-up comedy. I mean, I don't want to put too much more on my plate, and being a good improv practitioner might help with the stand-up comedy, but I'm not going to start doing improv at the cost of getting on stage. So for me right now, probably the next 7 years of my comedy career until I get to 10 years is really going to be focused on learning how to write good jokes and learning how to manage the stage and deliver material consistently. So until I feel like I've got that under my belt, I don't think it's wise to to try and delve into too much more.
Indeed. And what is your favorite joke a comic has written?
My favorite joke a comic has written. Does it have to be somebody else? Can I tell you mine?
Yeah, you can go with yours.
Let's see. Okay, so my favorite joke that I've written recently is pandemic has been so crazy. Had dudes out here washing their hands like they remember where their dick's been. That's my favorite new joke. I mean, I don't know if this is even a complete joke from Carlin, but one that I quote very often is take the dumbest person that you know and remember that 50% of everybody is dumber than that.
Good
And
one.
that's a Carlin quote. I'm not sure if there's a punchline that comes after that or if that is the punchline. But I say that shit all the time.
Indeed. And let's see here. What experience would you like your audience to take with them after a set is over?
I just want people to have had a good time. I want people to just feel good, feel like you laughed, feel like you didn't have to worry about all the bullshit that was going on outside the room for the time that you were there. I think there's a lot of escapism in comedy. One of the things that we try and do is just take over people's brains. Some of the best comedy sets, people say that I felt like the comic was just thinking for me. And that's really what you're trying to do is you want to get people on the train that you're on, and then you guide and steer that train. Right. And so allowing people the opportunity to really let go and not be stressed for just a few minutes. That's the important thing. I mean, of course it's amazing. I remember the first time somebody quoted one of my jokes to me. I was driving Uber. I was driving Uber in Pensacola, and I picked these girls up. They hopped in the back of my Pilot, and they were off to some club. And so, we're just doing the thing. And out of the back seat, this girl quotes one of my jokes to me, and I nearly lost my shit. because it was the most adorable thing. And like somebody remembered one of my jokes. I didn't even recognize this girl. And it was flattering. You know, you want to talk about an ego boost. That was very, very cool. But that's rare. I don't expect people to remember the material, especially if I don't even remember what I said on stage until I listen to the recording. So less philosophy right now. I would love to be poignant eventually and make good points and bring enlightenment to the stage. But I'll leave that to the people that are qualified. Chappelle and Eddie Murphy and the people that can really do that. For now, I'm just going to focus on making people laugh and feeling good for a few minutes.
Indeed, most definitely. And Compton, this is the final portion of the show, which is the reason why I call the show the Stand Up Speakeasy is because it's the Prohibition, the Roaring Twenties, and you got to know someone to join the club. It's like the secret society of stand-up comics, and you were nominated. And with that being said, Compton, which comics from Alabama would you like to see as my featured guest on the Stand Up Speakeasy?
How long you want this list to be?
As long as you want, because I'm trying to put the entire state on the map.
Okay. In Tuscaloosa, the top 3 names I'd give you out of Tuscaloosa would be Richard Lockhart. Was very instrumental over the last few years in cultivating and building a scene in Tuscaloosa. One of the people from Tuscaloosa that have helped him immensely and is an incredible talent and showrunner in his own right, R.J. Marchand, and Lauren Lamphere, and Brooks Bell. Those are the 4 showrunners in Tuscaloosa that host stuff, and they definitely, I guess you could call them the gatekeepers in Tuscaloosa. They're the ones that are running stuff at the moment, and Lockhart knows a lot of people and has been around for a while. So that dude's got plenty to say, and so those guys. And then in Birmingham, let's see, Michael Statham has great stories from the Stardome. Eugene Henry is a great headliner that I've had the pleasure of featuring for recently, and runs a great show called The Stages in Birmingham. And Austin Trott is a younger comic, but is very funny and making great headway, hosts an open mic. And then let's see. You probably know most of the Mobile people, most of the Pensacola people. Zeke and Carson and Jade, the big ones out of Mobile. The Governor, like I said, my partner in Burning the Set List. Great comic, been around for a really long time. Was kind enough to take me on tour with him. And have you talked to Krangus Gillespie yet?
I don't think so.
Krangus Gillespie is the guy that founded Landmass Comedy. And Landmass Comedy is the group that is spearheading the Mississippi Gulf Coast comedy scene. So they do a lot of shows, do a lot of open mics, and Krangus is the guy that's kind of wrangling that herd of cats for Landmass Comedy. Jacob Craig is a great stand-up comic down there in Ocean Springs. Jason Robbins, those two host a podcast together called Open Micers. If you haven't met them, they're great dudes to talk to. And I mean, that's a pretty big chunk as far as Huntsville goes. Matthew Tate, if you haven't talked to Matthew Tate or Scott Eason, or who else is up there? Elliot White. And somebody that would be really good to talk to is a lady named Kimberly Wilson. She runs the Shenanigan Comedy Theater in Huntsville, and is a stand-up comic, is an improv teacher, is a teacher in general, and is doing great things in the world of comedy. So that's a pretty in-depth list. I can keep going if you just need recommendations. I can list all of the comics around for you, but that gives you 3 or 4 in each of the cities that I'm in pretty frequently. Well, except for Pensacola, you probably know most of the Pensacola cats by now. But Andrew Farrar, You said you've talked to Olivia. Uh, who else is a lot of fun over there? Matt Mosley. Have you heard that name yet?
Not yet.
Yeah, Matt Mosley in Pensacola. He's a talker, man. He's one of those guys that once you get him on a roll, he's got a great flow, and he can just keep going. He's a ton of fun to talk to. Matt Mosley. That should definitely be the last guy I recommend because he's amazing.
Indeed, that's quite a list. So eventually I will get to everyone. And out of curiosity, what's the governor's real name? So
Martin Wright.
awesome. And I might need your help on spelling their names, but because sometimes I reach out to the wrong people, and it's just like, oh man, you're not a stand-up comic, and I felt bad. So, but so for sure. And so please check out Azalea City Comedy, Burning the Set List, and Stinger's Comedy on Facebook. Instagram is Obi-Wan Kowalski, Killing Cancer with Comedy, and Stinger's Comedy. ComptonSmith.com. Check out his both YouTube channels. I put everything in the description box below for Compton. So just copy and paste, and it'll take it in to those awesome sites. And like, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. And that being said, Compton, are there any final words you'd like to give out to the audience at home?
Well, I was just thinking we could take another hour to talk about, the philosophical conundrum of the nation. Parting words, man. There's a lot of craziness going on right now, and if anybody feels like they need anything right now, you can find it. You can find it in a podcast. You can reach out to somebody. There are plenty of us that want and are willing to help make a crazy time in our history not quite so crazy. And I guess the most wise thing I could share is, suffering is real, but there is an end and a means to an end of that suffering. So as bad as it is, there is a path out, and I encourage anybody, even if you think you're doing fine, take a look at that. Take a look at the fact that there is a lot of suffering in the world, and it's a noble effort to try and make less suffering in the world.
Indeed, most definitely. And those are great parting words. And thank you so much, Compton, for being my 100th guest on the Stand Up Speakeasy. It means the world to me. And I'm glad for you. Thank you for taking time out to do the interview and all that good stuff. And I can't wait to go on tour and meet you in person and all that good and all that rad stuff. And with that being said, for everyone at home, thank you so much for joining us on the 100th episode of the Stand Up Speakeasy. I can't believe we made it this far, and we made it this far. And thank you so much for joining us on the ride. It's been fantastic. And be safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Stand Up Speakeasy.